Now's the time. I thought my subject to be learned that summer of 1993 was perfect faith, and indeed it was. But intertwined, because it's what makes the idea of perfect faith a functionally sound concept, was simultaneous time. When does creation happen? Now. When does a probability get selected from the infinite field of probabilities and inserted into our life? Now. And which thoughts, emotions, beliefs, attitudes, and expectations select the next probability? The ones we hold now. Everything happens in the spacious present. It is, as Seth says, the point of power. The present, as you think of it, and in practical working terms, is the point at which you select your physical experience from all those events that could be materialized. High on my list of favorite Seth quotes is the one I mentioned in the 180-degree turn, and I'm going to repeat it here because of its breakthrough significance. There is no cause and effect in the terms in which you understand the words, nor is there a succession of moments that follow one after the other. And without a succession of moments following one after the other, you can see that the idea of cause and effect becomes meaningless. An action in the present cannot be caused by an action in the past, and neither action can be the cause of future action in a basic reality where neither past nor future exists. Cause and effect, the theory that has the world mesmerized. Almost all plans of action, responses, attitudes, reactions, decisions, and emotions are based on a belief in cause and effect. And if there is no such thing, what happens to our thinking? Just about everything, and all of it good. We become free to view events with a radical new eye and figure out just what the heck it is we're dealing with in physical reality. I'd been back at the office for a few days after returning from Virginia when I opened the publication produced by a distributor of Beyond the Winning Streak. I perused the pages for the ad we'd placed in the issue. I gave it a second flip through because the first time I hadn't found the ad. I didn't the second time either. Damn. It was to have been the kickoff in our advertising efforts for the book. We'd finally gotten serious about marketing it. And look what happened. The ad was never run. Now we'd have to wait another 2 months and lose valuable time in the process. Then the phrase perfect faith crept into my mind. Oh yeah, I'm supposed to be learning this stuff, but this isn't the time to try. After all, it's after the fact. The damage is already done. Well, what can it hurt? It sure beats getting angry, and maybe there's a silver lining I can see. Like, well, I can't think of one. So I sat at my desk and closed my eyes. I calmed down, cleared my thoughts, and said, perfect faith. I used that phrase as a signal to settle in. Let it be, accept, no, release. I felt my mind clear, and then visualized a short scene of me feeling very happy in this moment. I opened my eyes and smiled, knowing, or hoping I knew, it had worked. The whole process took maybe about a minute. I reached for the phone and called our distributor. Oh yes, our ad rep said. You're right. The ad didn't run in the July issue. It ran in the special May-June issue that was circulated to twice the usual audience because it was handed out at the annual publishing convention that month. Although your artwork arrived after the cutoff date, we had space available and squeezed you in. Okay, committee, what happened? When was that ad placed in the May-June publication? According to them, it was the moment I decided to challenge the outcome of what looked like a dead end. Operating from the present, I opened up probabilities in the past and allowed a different ending to the story to occur in the present. A future self's helping hand. How about impacting the present from the future? Is that a possibility? If simultaneous time is valid, it must be. Here's a story for you. You can draw your own conclusions. One day I walked into a store for an unplanned shopping trip. As I went to pay for my $95 item, I found I had left my credit cards and checkbook at home. Then a memory flashed of Stan giving me $100 a week previously and of me placing it in my purse. I dug it out and paid for my purchase. I started wondering about that money, since it's not common for Stan to hand me such a sum unless there's a reason. Mostly, I wondered if I'd created the memory and the money in my moment of need. In talking to the committee that night, they said, no, that wasn't the case. It seems my future self had reached back in time to the previous week and, knowing I would need the money, prompted Stan to offer it to me. He complied, and I stuffed it away. The future self who helped me out was the me in the store desiring the $95 item. Little old matter generators. And then there was the question about a forgotten blue coat I suddenly remembered was tucked away in a storage container. I was headed to the East Coast in February and needed a dressy, ultra-warm coat. A couple years previously, we'd moved from house to house and in the process had stored little used items in a warehouse. Again, I flashed on a memory, this time of the blue coat, so I drove to the storage area and dug it out. I was relieved to find it, because truthfully I couldn't quite remember if I really owned one or if it was a figment of my imagination. By now, I was learning to question seemingly innocuous events, ones we all meet every day in our realities, so I asked the committee when exactly the blue coat was placed in the storage area. 2 years ago, or the moment I thought of it. When I thought of it, they said. It seems I placed it in my memory at that point and assigned it to the past. As an intriguing aside, the committee says that until we enter a room or view a scene, until we experience it, there is nothing materialized in our space continuum. It's all there as psychic or psychological patterns, but until we actualize them through one or more of our senses, meaning we see, feel, hear, taste, or smell them, they are not solidified into matter. In fact, whatever scene is behind our heads at this very moment is not materialized in our private physical reality until we experience it in some sensory way. We're all constant little matter generators, it seems. In the blink of an eye. How fast can we change our reality? As fast as we can change our thoughts, attitudes, beliefs, focus, or intent. Probabilities always surround us, and we select the ones to be activated in physical reality as each moment progresses. According to Seth, we change probabilities constantly and, using his word, seamlessly. As we become more aware of the flow of probabilities in and out of our days, there comes a time when we can almost spot the seam. The first time I spaced out Portland, I not only didn't spot the seam, I tried to convince myself there wasn't any. Stan and I had just moved to the Northwest that year, and I wasn't very familiar with the drive between our home in Oregon and the house we just purchased on the island in Washington. It's a 200-mile trip between the two, and the scenery is lovely, but cruising through Portland is special. From the freeway, bridges high above the city, the view is of skyscrapers and emerald green parks, nestled up to the gracious Willamette River. On this particular trip, I was headed north from Eugene. Then, at the southernmost border of Portland, a strange thing happened. One moment I had yet to reach the city, the next I was 5 miles north of the downtown area. To set the record straight, I was completely sober, in a great frame of mind, playing Chariots of Fire on the tape deck and looking forward to seeing Portland on this clear, gorgeous day. When I reached the island hours later, I dug out a map of the city and scanned it for clues that would tell me I'd made a mistake, that I'd simply taken a bypass, a more direct route in error, or something. I would have accepted any small morsel of fact that suggested nothing unusual had occurred. No matter how I analyzed the map, the conclusion I was forced to draw was that I had hit a blip on the space timeline. And the oddity didn't stop here. I called Stan back in Eugene and exclaimed, "You'll never guess what happened when I got to Portland." His immediate response, "The city disappeared." But 5 years later, when it happened again, I was much more prepared to understand. We'd been talking to the committee for almost 4 years at that point, and with many odd events now under my belt, I took this one at face value immediately. I'd spent the day in Lake Oswego, a southern suburb of Portland, at Betty Keelty's Home Planning Set Network International's next big conference with her and Nancy Walker. Stan had been delayed that day in Eugene, so he missed the ride through hyperspace. Nancy, Betty, and I had gone to a local restaurant for a late dinner, and then I headed north to the island. With the soft rain beating on the window, I settled in for a quiet, cozy drive home. About 3 minutes or so after I entered the freeway, it crossed my mind to stay in the right lanes so I'd be positioned to continue on Interstate 5 through Portland instead of being forced at an upcoming fork in the road onto another highway heading west. Based on the familiar exterior scene scrolling by, I figured I was maybe 5 miles from the fork. Less than a minute later, I noticed the next exit sign begin to appear down the road. I kept my eyes on it as it approached, interested in checking my exact location. I didn't spot the seam because it was so smooth, but in that minute or so of time, I had traveled over 10 miles and once again missed the city. The exit sign I viewed was almost at the Washington-Oregon border on the far side of Portland. Materializing luggage. Sorry folks, it looks like all your luggage was left at the Portland airport in error, said the United Airlines representative at the baggage carousel at San Francisco International Airport. After much moaning and groaning, about 20 Portland passengers, including Stan and me, were led to a special table set up to handle lost luggage claims for our group. No, I thought, this is only one probability. We don't have to accept it, at least not without giving it a fight. So I relaxed, thought of the various probabilities around the situation, and saw us walking away with our luggage. Stan was doing the same, although without consciously deciding to alter probabilities. Then came a phone call to the harried airline representative. All the luggage made it to San Francisco, but had been unloaded in an incorrect building. He was told, a mistake no one could fathom. Later, in response to a question, the committee said the bags had been materialized in our reality while we were filling out the lost luggage forms, meaning we had indeed changed probabilities. A kitten moves on. Humans are not the only ones who select probabilities, consciously or otherwise. Every form of consciousness goes through the same process, at some level making decisions about what it chooses to experience. An interesting event occurred with a little gray kitten that brought home that fact. One of our cats, Blackie, had given birth to 5 kittens across the road in an abandoned shack. It was a joy to watch her lead them up our driveway one sunny day, bringing her young home for the first time. Stan and I watched in delight as they progressed toward their new living quarters, which seemed to be our garage, since that's the direction in which Blackie was headed. About halfway through their trip, one little gray kitten veered off into some tall weeds by the side of the driveway that led to heavier undergrowth. Since another cat went with it, seemingly to overlook its side excursion, we didn't worry. But as the minutes passed, Stan and I decided enough was enough. We'd go find the kitten and bring it to its mother. We searched the weeds and undergrowth but saw no sign of the baby. The older cat by now was with Blackie and her little ones, but the gray kitten was nowhere to be found. By then we were in panic. How could the kitten have disappeared? But disappeared it had, in more ways than one. A couple of days later, we found the body of the little one, exactly where we'd been looking all along. Stan and I were deeply saddened, berating ourselves for not having saved the kitten's life. But fortunately, we can ask seemingly unanswerable questions of the committee, and this time was no exception. Their response shed further light on how probabilities operate and the free choice that goes into their selection by each consciousness involved. They said the kitten had not wanted to continue living, and in fact had never planned to live past babyhood. Therefore, its excursion into the weeds was part of a plan, or probability, that a kitten put into place. They said that when Stan and I searched that patch of weeds over and over, the kitten was always there, but in agreement with its desire, we chose a probability where we didn't materialize it. We could have selected a probability where we did indeed see the kitten, and then went on to save it, but the kitten would have later found another way to leave physical reality, since it was determined to do so. I'm not even remotely suggesting we not help our friends in need, because they have set their stage of choice. Not at all. For all we know, we may become a reason they decide to forgo death, because they find the experience of compassion uplifting or worthwhile. And, of course, our saving them may be part of our own plan to experience compassion. We do what we feel moved to do for people and animals alike, and if they are no longer need or want our help, they will select a probability where we can't interfere with their choices. But meanwhile, they just may be touched by our gestures of love. We surely will be. Following the bouncing probabilities. How fast do probabilities change? On a moment's notice. In our early days on the Ouija board, Stan and I started asking questions about the probability of certain future events coming to fruition, and that type of question in some form or another is still one of our most frequently asked. For instance, one time the question was, what's the current probability based on our thoughts, attitudes and beliefs of the moment that we'll sell the house within 60 days? The answer, 86%. Then we asked again, but now made the time frame 30 days. The answer, 72%. As the week progressed, we kept tabs on the percentage through varied questions, watched it move up and down the probability ladder until it grew quite high and the house sold shortly after. Another time, I asked the probability of a certain wholesaler picking up beyond the winning streak for distribution. It was a relatively low 58%, and the next week it was a mere 2%. I thought the committee was joking with the last one and told them so. They joked back, but they didn't change the number. A couple of days later, we got notice that it had been declined. I started to count on the probabilities they gave us. seeing them as solid bets one way or the other. Big mistake, according to the committee, because probabilities jump all over the board constantly, based on how we're feeling at the time. To drive the point home, they once gave me a probability of 75% on something I wanted badly to see happen. I groaned and said it was far too low. Immediately, they swung the pointer to 53%. I gasped and yelled, and the percentage dropped to 40%. Finally, I started catching on and changed my tune. Now I said how lovely it was that I had a whole 40% chance of making it happen, and the pointer went to 55%. Then I really laid it on, saying how wonderful it was that I had a marvelous 55% opportunity ahead of me, and the pointer went to 81%. Sure, it was all in fun, but their meaning was very clear. Want to know your percentage of chance of making something happen? Monitor your thoughts and feelings about it. As your emotions swing, so goes your probability. An interesting lesson, is it not? Here's another intriguing story about probabilities and their volatility. Stan sometimes follows the stock market, and once he asked what the probability was that the market would rise by a certain number. The answer? 25% for the leading probability, but there were 27 other strong contenders milling about that suggested other levels of rise and fall. The market closed down 30 points. The committee said it had been a 5%er that came from behind and grew in prominence because the mass beliefs driving the market that day, in that particular shared reality or shared perception of reality, took a collective dive. Whew, so much to learn.